Welcome to Masters Week. It's going to be a good one. I mean, how can it not be, really, right? It's Augusta. Best in the world are here this week to fend for the green jacket. I mean, it makes my job easy because I'm not necessarily the most energetic, and I don't have to get anyone excited for Masters Week. So I'm pretty pumped. There's a lot to talk about, even though the field is quite small, and it feels like there are a few heavy favorites. There are literally a few heavy favorites on FanDuel Sportsbook, as you can see here already on my screen, with Bryson DeChambeau 9.5 to 1, same as Dustin Johnson as the co-favorite. Jordan Spieth on quite a heater, 11 to 1, same as his buddy Justin Thomas, and then Jon Rahm 12 to 1. I mean, like, those five names alone should get you excited. So welcome on into the FanDuel PGA Q&A for this week. I'm your host, Brandon Gdula. I'm the managing editor over at numberFire.com. I'll be talking about the field, the betting odds on FanDuel Sportsbook, the daily fantasy slate on FanDuel, win simulations, and whatever else you want, because this is a Q&A format. So hit up the comment section on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or Twitch if you have questions for the Masters. I'm going to start things by just kind of going down the field, showing the depth of who's actually here this week. I mean, I named five heavy favorites here. Would not be surprised if any of them pick up the win. Rory McIlroy would complete the career Grand Slam. He's 19 to 1 to win on FanDuel Sportsbook. Patrick Cantlay, my guy, Xander Schauffele at 25 to 1. Brooks Koepka 28 to 1. Colin Morikawa already a major champion at the PGA. 29 to 1. Patrick Reed, former winner. I don't have to keep naming them, but this is just, you're going to have so many options this week, whether it's from a betting card or from a daily fantasy standpoint. And that's what makes it so kind of difficult. It makes it easy to some degree, because in daily fantasy on FanDuel, you will see some big names at reasonable salaries, and that kind of makes a balanced lineup pretty enticing. And that is something that we can get into. But honestly, we all love long shots. It's always going to be a great story if a long shot wins a major, specifically the Masters. But historically, we don't typically see that. I did dig back into some numbers. I talked about this on Covering the Spread, which you can check out, co-hosted by my Heat Check co-host Jim Sonis and Dr. Ed Fang. But you basically see the best of the best win here. If you look at the official World Golf rankings since 2003, we have data on PGAtour.com since 2003, looking at official World Golf rankings. Of those 18 winners, 16 of them were inside the top 30 in the official World Golf rankings the week that they won the Masters. So yes, you can dream about hitting a long shot at the Masters. It just is not the most common. So keep that in mind. I think the real long shots this week kind of come in around like that 35 to 39 number. Daniel Berger, 37 now. I like him a lot. I bet him myself. Webb Simpson, same for him, 39 to 1. So that's just kind of the feel for what we're looking at this week, or at least I'm looking at this week from a betting standpoint. I'm going to look at the course quickly because I'm sure we had kind of a lot of questions. I like to go to Data Golf to kind of get the feel for things. Obviously, Augusta National we get every year. We pour over it a bit extra year over year, but there's not any shot link data for us, at least. There is shot link data, there is strokes gain data, but I don't have access to it. So this tool here, which Data Golf can show what drives variation scoring, is blank for the Masters, unfortunately, but that does not mean that we just throw up our hands and not really know what to do. They do have a course fit tool, and you would expect anecdotally that driving distance jumps out, and it does here. Driving distance, iron play with strokes gain approach around the green play matters more. Putting matters more than your average PGA Tour course. The one stat that doesn't particularly matter as much is driving accuracy, and we see that pretty much year over year with who fares well at Augusta. Now, if you recall some of the most recent winners, and this is just something that I kind of want to foreground before we get into everything else. Tiger Woods, Patrick Reed, Sergio Garcia, Danny Willett, Jordan Spieth. These guys aren't specifically the guys we think about whenever we think of the longest hitters off the tee. The thing is, they're not prohibitively short, and that is something that definitely matters. They all have, to a degree, really good short games. Sergio not so much with the putter, but just a great tee to green play. player, and all those guys can gain strokes tee to green. So that's kind of what I'm looking at this week. Realistically, the best golfers that we can get. Again, the official World Golf rankings kind of bear that out. You can look at stroke differential, which is the same as strokes gained total. These guys, like the guys who win here, they're just the best and they're in good form. So just keep that in mind. Don't get overextended. Don't get out over your skis looking for some long shots. And a cool thing about this data golf tool, this course fit tool, is they will show you who kind of gets the biggest boost based on this week's course. You would expect the longer hitters to kind of jump up here. Bryson DeChambeau gets that. Tony Finau, Dustin Johnson. Spieth, interestingly, for him, it's mostly the fact that he has great short game and accuracy is downplayed. That's what Spieth is struggling with, even as he's resurging back toward the top. So that's kind of what we're looking at. My key stats this week, more specifically, are strokes gain approach, strokes gain off the tee, driving distance, Augusta form overall. Kind of keeping it simple. Strokes gain putting, we have bent grass greens, but actually putting and good putters don't necessarily fare well here. It's more about the best tee to green players overall. Looks like I got a bunch of questions. I'm here because of Dr. Disrespect. Welcome. Hopefully I can kind of help you with your DFS lineups. Question from Facebook from Brad Clark. Give me two low buy golfers. So I would say for me this week, I'm trying to keep my lineups a little bit more balanced. Try not to dig too far down into like the 7,000 range on FanDuel. And one of the reasons for that is because if you look at historical optimal lineups at the past three Masters before that, FanDuel had a different format. Only one of these golfers was in the 7,000 range. That was Dylan Fratelli this past November at 7,600 back when the course played really easily. So you just don't see a whole lot of long shots, a lot of super value golfers making optimal lineups. And you would think, in theory, lower salaries kind of help them make optimal lineups more if they have even respectable showings that way. Because again, if the winners are coming in at 11.8, for example, from DJ, Tiger 11.1, Reed was kind of an outlier at 10,000, but you would think you would actually see plenty of golfers in the 7,000 range, but we don't get that this at the Masters generally. But that doesn't mean that we can't target some sort of salary saving golfers. A few I like. I'll get rid of the studs here and focus on Ryan Palmer is one of them for me. You can see that he is pretty good at gaining strokes. This number here, this 1.11, is my personal adjustments for recency and field strength. And he shows up as a pretty good golfer overall. And you can see that he is good tee to green, good with approach, and he is long enough off the tee. He's in the 68th percentile relative to this field over the past 100 rounds. At Augusta, 16 rounds to his name, and with some overall positive splits for him. Just a heads up, Dr. Disrespect is on tomorrow at noon in case you are tuning in to see him instead of me, which I would totally understand. But so Ryan Palmer is one for me who I have my eye on. Let's see who else might pop up for me this week. I have a whole primer written on numberFire, but Billy Horschel is one. Let me sort this by salary real quick. Billy Horschel is someone at 8,200. Doesn't have the best Augusta form necessarily, but coming off the WGC match play win. So he's someone I'm looking at, even though he doesn't necessarily fit the course super well. Carlos Ortiz is a debutant. I generally like him. Siwoo Kim I'd be all right with. Jason Kokrak, though, and Corey Connors I will highlight because those are kind of two of my favorite. Connors is coming in great form, and Kokrak does have a recent win, so you like to see that for the Masters. The win sims are pretty low. The win probability for those guys is pretty low, and you can see that in their actual FanDuel Sportsbook odds at 95-1 for Corey Connors, 120-1 for Jason Kokrak. But they are gaining strokes, relative to the world average golfer when weighted for recency and field strength. Both pretty solid tee to green players. not so great around the green. That's kind of something that is a drawback for a lot of value golfers this week. But for the most part, all value golfers do have issues to some degree. And you see kind of surprising, but for Jason Kokrak, very minimal Augusta history, just 2 rounds for him. Corey Connors was 10th here, I believe, in November, has played here 3 times, 1 missed cut, 2 made cuts. So I think Connors, and I won't be alone in that, is probably one of the best value plays of the week. So there's just a few of the names I'm targeting in the low end. Question, any disc golf coverage coming up in the future? I wish, but not for me. So stay tuned. Which first-time player has the best shot to finish highest? I think that's a pretty easy one. That's going to be actually the debutant list is fairly small, but Will Zalatoris for me is that guy. Zalatoris, Carlos Ortiz, Robert McIntyre are basically 3 pros making their debuts. But Zalatoris, really good tee to green for him. And I think that it's important to keep in mind that even if these guys don't win, that doesn't mean that they won't have good showings from a FanDuel standpoint. Just don't really get, you don't want to be betting these guys to win outright. But for Zalatoris, good off the tee, good with approach, and again, very good with distance, which is kind of the sort of the baseline that I would want from Zalatoris or from a debutant. Let's just throw in the other 2. McIntyre, not a ton of rounds on the PGA Tour, all things considered. And these are only PGA Tour stats, so just keep that in mind. But this number here would be, this would include his European Tour data. I think the thing for McIntyre that really stands out is that he's a lefty and can hit it pretty far. And that is pretty advantageous for Augusta. Ortiz, not necessarily long, not necessarily short. But again, of those 3, I'm going to lean toward Zalatoris. Connor's ownership might be high. Yes, I think that that's very much the case. But I will say, even if it is high, there are plenty of ways to differentiate because out of the top of the field, we have a ton of studs. Some of them are going to go a little under the radar. I would say Jordan Spieth will be very popular as well. Bryson and DJ as the co-favorites also could command a lot of popularity. So I would say that almost anyone else will be a little bit under the radar. And so even if Corey Connors is on 30% of lineups, if he finishes top 20, you can differentiate in so many other ways. And I think that is something to keep in mind. Question from Julian from YouTube, who is overvalued, who to avoid. I'm avoiding at the top Rory and to a degree probably Brooks Koepka because he's coming off of knee surgery. Rory is not necessarily in the best form. I think his form is overstated with how bad it is. But for me, I just prefer a lot of other golfers, honestly, right around his salary, including Xander and Rahm, specifically as sort of pivots away from Dustin Johnson and Bryson DeChambeau. These guys, as you can see here, this is a really important number for me. This is my recency and field adjusted strokes gained data over the past year. Rahm and Xander are part of like a big tier, not a big tier, but like the big tier, I should say, with Dustin Johnson, Bryson DeChambeau, and Justin Thomas. Rory hasn't quite been there. His irons are lacking by comparison, which is surprising because that's typically what he's known for. 68th percentile over the past year, according to my adjustments. Xander, as you can see here, 80th percentile, Rahm 88th percentile. So I'd say Rory, Brooks, and I think Colin Morikawa as well, just because of course fit. Those are some guys there at the top who I'm not really looking to be in on for this week. Zalatoris and Perez are showing up in a lot of my lineups. Zalatoris, I think, like, he has the ability to sort of break the mold and just be really good at Augusta. I would imagine he will have good Augusta form as his sample grows. So Zalatoris, not someone I was really in on early in the week, but I am warming up to it overall. Uh, where's Doc? Doc's coming on tomorrow at noon, in case you missed that. So come back tomorrow at noon for Dr. Disrespect. I think Koepka could be a real wild card, especially in GPP. So, yes, I think Brooks is a phenomenal tournament play coming off of his surgery. Sounds like he's hitting it pretty well from what I've seen. That's just sort of reports. I think Brooks is kind of someone you just kind of throw the stats out with because we know what his upside is. It's winning majors. It's kind of what he does, kind of all he cares about. Statistically, he's not going to pop quite so much as some other golfers just because of what he's doing, but really he's not that far off, and he does rate out better than Rory. Just with everything Brooks has gone through, his field adjusted and recency adjusted strokes gain number for me is actually a little bit higher than Rory. So I think Brooks Koepka is someone I'd be more inclined to bet Brooks, I would say, because if he is injured, if he withdraws, if he just is really hampered, he won't bog down a whole lineup, but he very easily could win. So I'd probably rather just bet him at that 28-1 number on FanDuel Sportsbook. This is a lot of my own data. I pull stuff and adjust it myself to answer that question. I think I'm all caught up here. So I think that one thing that really stands out to me this week is looking at this like 10K range with Spieth. I should probably just actually feature Jordan Spieth, talk about him more directly. But Spieth, Patrick Reed is always probably going to be under the radar, even though he's won here. It's just Reed. His salary is $100 under Jordan Spieth, and he's right between Spieth and Tony Finau. So two big fan favorites there. So I think Patrick Reed, just kind of by default, is a great GPP pivot away from just about everyone else here. I'm not probably going to get there, but I think from just a sheer game theory standpoint, makes a lot of sense. You can see my win stimulations here, 2.5%. It's not quite as high as some other golfers, but I mean, it's not substantially different. And for the leverage boost that you would get, I think Reed is definitely in play. So I'll feature Jordan Spieth, but I think like this range right here, again, Spieth I think is very much in play, which is not a hot take, but I think that I'll talk about him more in just a second. But Tony Finau, I like a lot. Victor Hovland, I'd be all right with. I think Webb Simpson's going to go overlooked because there's such an emphasis on distance. But like Webb, after he leaves the tee box, is probably as good as anyone. And he's got two top tens here the past 2 years, or past two starts, I should say. So I think Webb is very interesting, probably off of Hatton, but Daniel Berger at 10-3 is one of my favorite plays of the week. But I am going to highlight Jordan Spieth because I think he deserves sort of his own section here. And I'm going to talk through what I see with Jordan Spieth because I think that he could sort of make or break everything this week with how popular he may be. 11-1 to win on FanDuel Sportsbook. This number here, 0.8 strokes gained per round. Again, this should show us like what you would expect him to beat the world average golfer across the PGA Tour, European Tour, Korn Ferry Tour by. Rory was like a 1.3. Rahm and Xander are like up around above 2, same as Bryson and JT. So based on that alone, I'm not quite there with Spieth, but what you really have to kind of factor in is that Augusta shouldn't penalize him so much for this red flag here in fairways gained over the past 100 rounds. That data comes from Fantasy National. And this off the tee number, it gets bogged down by missing fairways. But the distance he gains, he doesn't really lose distance. And I think that's an important distinction. Again, recent winner here, but going back to like Tiger and Patrick Reed, Sergio was long, 18th entering in driving distance, but like you don't have to be the longest golfer in the field. You just have to be not completely losing strokes off the tee by hitting it short. So I think that Spieth just checks the box from these two numbers here with the irons and the wedges. I think are going to keep him afloat, and he's not going to really get himself into trouble. And we know that he's great on bent grass with the putter in his hand, and we know that he's great specifically at Augusta. So I think I'm pretty in on Jordan Spieth, even at high popularity. Again, I think there are plenty of ways you can differentiate, most specifically by, again, I would assume Corey Connors comes in very popular. Not playing Connors, playing any number of other values is going to be enough. One way you can think about how your lineups might look in a tournament is to sum up all of the draft percentages that you anticipate and see how that kind of goes. Now, what we do see at the Masters, actually, and in most majors, is that the top end of the popularity pool kind of gets narrow. That mark comes down. The most popular golfer generally is around 41% on average across all events on FanDuel. That's closer to like 33% on for Augusta specifically. So I think that there's going to be some natural leverage, even if some of these guys wind up being chalky. They're not going to be quite prohibitively chalky as we would typically see in a weaker event. Finau's too scary for me. Two most recent stroke play events were missed cuts. Yes, that is very much the case. But the most predictive sample that I've seen from like the research that I've come across is actually like 2 years. A full year is also quite predictive. Two events, 2 missed cuts can be 4 rounds. Not super predictive. We see guys bounce back from missed cuts. So I'm very cautious of jumping off of golfers after maybe 2 missed cuts. And if you're not looking at the data and how he missed the cut, I would just caution, checking that out as well. But for me, Finau, long term, his red flag is missing fairways. Putting, he gets a bad rap as a putter, but he is above baseline in bent grass putting. And we've seen him do well at Augusta. So I think Finau for the salary is a very fine sort of high floor play. I think that he's just primed to bounce back based on all these stats here. I did bet him, which, he'd have to overcome the Tony Finau can't win narrative. But I'm in on Finau. I like him relative to a lot of the golfers in that range, but my favorite golfer realistically is going to be Daniel Berger in that 10K range. Strong win odds for me, and my win simulations are actually 2 different models that I average together, but basically it boils down to taking your long-term adjusted form, adjust that for the course that you're playing, and then see how that compares. And for me, Daniel Berger rates out as a positive expected value from a win probability standpoint. At least he did whenever I ran it initially. I did update that, but no red flags, no even black dots, which would be subpar, so below 50th percentile or below. But I was talking about like Xander and Rahm and JT kind of hitting that 2.0 strokes per round once adjusted for recency and field strength. Bryson's at a 2. Berger's at a 1.9 over the past year. He's been very good. I think he's underrated. And even though he didn't get to play the Masters in November, he does have 3 starts here. He's played pretty well, and he's in much better form than he has been. So I think Daniel Berger could be a little bit chalky, but for me, definitely worth it. I think he's a high floor, high ceiling play at 10-3. Thanks, Thomas, for the support. Let's see what else we got here. I'll jump over to my win simulations and just show you guys what I'm seeing from a simulation standpoint. Dustin Johnson does rate out as a pretty heavy favorite, but doesn't make him a good bet at 9.5 to 1 on FanDuel Sportsbook. Same for Bryson. It's 6.7% probability to win. Doesn't rate out quite where you need him. And that's the case for most of the top of the board. Aside from my guy, Xander, 5.4% likely to win. He has a runner-up and a 17th at Augusta to his name. He is every bit as good when he's on as those 4 names above him. He doesn't get that respect. It's partially deserved because he did not convert any wins when he's had the opportunity to do so. But I think a lot of that comes down to variance. I don't think that Xander has shown anything to make us think that he can't close things out. He has wins on the PGA Tour. He's won in tough fields. There are no cuts, but they're still tough fields. Did win the 72-hole stroke play, or he had the low 72 hole score at the Tour Championship. So I think that Xander's getting a lot of knock. We're seeing his number drift, and I think he is one of the best bets of the week. Finau, again, rating out as a positive expected value. Daniel Berger as well. Hovland, I haven't bet. I'm not really in on him from a DFS standpoint, but is a pretty fair value according to my win simulations here. Patrick Reed, not quite, but not too far off. And then Webb Simpson, I think, is just a fascinating name because I'll pull him up on the Finder here and show you. Look, we know that the red flag is distance. But despite that, he's been top 10 here again. The past 2 starts that he's had, he has pretty solid Augusta performance. He has a lot of rounds under his belt at Augusta. We see him not really shy away from tough competition and everything else. The short game, pretty much the best on the planet. These 2 here. The irons, about as good as you could really ask for. So I think Webb is a very safe play, and it goes back to the idea maybe of building a really balanced lineup around like Daniel Berger, who's underrated relative to the salary. Webb Simpson as well, possibly Tony Finau. If not Finau, maybe some other guys. Scotty Scheffler's there. Paul Casey, Cam Smith. It's a pretty loaded range, right around 10,000. I don't know if I'm building one lineup. It's probably going to be a little. It's probably going to have one of the golfers in the 11,000 range. Or DJ, just throw him in there. 1 or 2 in the 10K range, and then really try to balance things out from there and not dip too far. Definitely not in the 7,000 range. I don't like anyone enough for a single lineup there, and we just don't see those guys make the optimal lineups generally. So I'm looking more at this sort of like right around 10K range. You could love everyone in your lineup. You give yourself 6 out of 6 chances to win. If you're building around these golfers. Cam Smith, for me, I mentioned Daniel Berger plenty, but Matthew Fitzpatrick, lots of form at Augusta, but he's golfing better than ever. Scotty Scheffler, Paul Casey, Cam Smith, Joaquin Niemann, just 2 rounds for him as an amateur, but again, best form he's had in his life for entering this Masters. So I don't think that the 2 rounds is really something that you can knock him for. I don't do a whole lot of one and done stuff, no. But yes, I do agree. Webb Simpson at those odds, very enticing. He's someone who I have highlighted already. Fitzpatrick, I wanted to get into, and you mentioned him as well. Fitzpatrick, kind of as a narrative, plays really well at tougher courses. He is not long. He's in the 15th percentile over the past 100 rounds, according to Fantasy National, but he's very accurate, and that helps him gain enough strokes off the tee. He's not going to kind of run himself out of contention with the driver, and he is just so good with the putter in his hands. Typically better on Bermuda than bent grass, but either way, he gained strokes on average in his career at Augusta, and a lot of rounds as well for him at Augusta. So I think Fitzpatrick 10-1 again. I'm really sticking on this, but right around 10K, lots of good names that you can build around. And I think that honestly, that's going to be where, because there's a lot of overlap between the betting odds and the FanDuel salaries, that's pretty much where I'm going to be living for the rest of my betting card. I've bet Xander, Finau, and Berger so far, and Webb. But these are sort of the names where I start to see some value. And I think that there's a lot of benefit in just being heavy on these guys, because we kind of see that in the optimals again, like that 9K range to 10K. Those guys are kind of, you have your winner and then you kind of fill it out with the rest of that sort of mid range. I don't have I can't give out a lineup. But I would say that a sort of top heavy and then balanced lineup from there is what I'm leaning toward. I talk more about the fantasy specific slate on the Heat Check podcast with my co-host Jim Sonis, who actually is going to join me here to talk MLB in just a second. Jim, you there?
Hello. What's going on,
Jim,
man?
What's
How's
up?
It going?
Oh, Just talking some Masters. Hope I did lots of questions, lots to kind of look at. So
you got to my guy Matthew Fitzpatrick. That's
yes.
good. I'll
where did
take
he go
that.
to where did he go to college?
The Northwestern University. Obviously.
And where did you go to college?
The Northwestern University.
Okay.
I was more excited, though, because they were asking about one-and-done picks. And I was thinking about my one-and-done pick for this week. And I'm sure this is exactly what they were talking about. I think it's Bubba Wallace for this week for Martinsville. So I'm assuming that's what they were asking about is one-and-done picks for NASCAR. I have not done that well so far this year in my one-and-done picks. So maybe I'm not the right person to ask, but Black Cayman, if you want someone for Martinsville, again, I'm assuming this is what we're talking about here, Bubba Wallace, going to be your guy for this week for one-and-dones. I'm glad that you decided to stick up for my guy Tony Finau here, Brandon. I appreciate that for sure. I think that I was talking about him on covering the spread with you earlier today. I think that he's a good bet. So excited to hear that we're on the same page, and I appreciate you holding down the house before we talk some baseball now. Thank you. Appreciate it. Good luck with your bets this week.
Yeah, I'm going to hop off before you talk baseball. Best of luck to you with baseball tonight and Masters
You
this
love
week.
Baseball. Your favorite sport. There's only like 3 slates left this year. Come on. Either way.
Yeah,
appreciate Brandon. Thank you very much, Brandon, for swinging on by and talking about the Masters, which puts us now into our regular discussion here every weekday, 4 p.m. Eastern. We are talking MLB DFS right here on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter channels. Answer your questions about that day's main slate. Now, tomorrow, bit of a weird slate for sure. The main slate, I believe, is probably going to be the early slate because there's not a whole lot cooking with regards to the late slate. There are like 2 games starting after 6:35. So we'll still have our stream at 4:35 or at 4 tomorrow, regular time. After Dr. Disrespect does his stream at noon, we'll be on at 4 p.m. So should be a fun one. Might not be just MLB DFS because of the way things are breaking out. But regardless, we'll be here tomorrow as well. So make sure you're subscribed on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Periscope channels. All right. So we're talking MLB DFS now. And good thing you're here because it's a really fun slate on tap for today. There are 3 legitimate aces at the top of the pitching pool. We got Tyler Glasnow, Yu Darvish, and Lucas Giolito. And we talked about this in the solo shot, my ranking of those guys, but let's go through the process. We're ranking those guys right now in case you didn't tune in and want to know why. I like Giolito a lot. Giolito is facing the Seattle Mariners. They have Giolito, 36% strikeout rate in his most relevant sample, which is his past 10 starts, where he's been throwing a couple more sliders than he had been previously. 36% strikeout rate, 3.21 skill interactive ERA, going up against a Mariners team that has good numbers since the start of last year. But we talked about this last week where you take that number with a grain of salt because a lot of the guys on this Mariners team didn't have a lot of sample on last year's numbers. So, it wasn't a big sample. I think that 110 WRC plus them against righties will come down as the year goes along. Don't care too much about that personally. 25% strikeout rate for them against righties. That bodes really well because you look at the other guys we have available to us. Again, Yu Darvish against the Giants, 21% strikeout rate. Glasnow, 23% strikeout rate for the Red Sox, but Glasnow not quite as stretched out as Giolito. 77 pitches for him versus 87 for Giolito. So I have Giolito be number 1 for me right now. Otaku is here for Dr. Disrespect again. Tomorrow, noon Eastern. See you then. Should be a lot of fun. Looking forward to it. Mateo says, I see Texas is playing 2 pitchers. So which Toronto bats do you like? They're facing Dane Dunning first. Yeah, they're using a piggyback. I don't know if that's actually the proper term. I tend to use the term long boy. I don't know if that's like the clinical term for this, but whatever. They're piggybacking today with Dane Dunning. Dunning being the first guy. What's interesting about this, Mateo, is that last year when Dunning was working in shorter bursts for the White Sox, he got better numbers. He was able to use his slider more often, and it seemed like the numbers for Dunning in that time were better than they were when he got stretched out. So I actually think that this is a pretty sharp strategy for Texas today, maybe keeping Dunning a little bit more limited, not having him go, a full 100 pitches. If he were to do that, I would be pretty concerned about his effectiveness. But if you keep him in shorter bursts, he showed last year he can be pretty good. His first 2 starts were against the Tigers and the Royals, 7 strikeouts in both those, and he did that on just 73 and 79 pitches. As you can see here, they did let him go a bit deeper later on in the season, but his numbers got worse the longer he was in the game. You see the longer starts over here, the swinging strike rate went down. That's not what you want. So I think it's a smart thing for Texas to do that. And I think it does downgrade the Blue Jays a little bit. So I think that is worth considering for sure. I still think they are a good stack for today because you look at the weather in Texas. It's not a great pitcher's park in general, but for today, when we have lower temperatures elsewhere on the 50s and the 60s out west, it actually is a good park for hitting. So I think right now, although it is concerning that we could see Dunning be able to use that slider more often with a shorter stint, I still think there is enough there to feel good about stacking against him for this one and using the Blue Jays here. So Mateo's still on the Blue Jays despite that. Red Devils 1, back in tomorrow. Looking forward to it. Appreciate it. Brad, do you like to stack Toronto and Texas both? Yes. So we're talking about the weather before, Brad, and that does help both those teams. And I also think they both have really good matchups. Let's flip over to the hitter tab here and check out that. We've got the Blue Jays and the Rangers right here. Rangers facing Tanner Roark. Last year, pretty tough year for Roark. He had always been someone previously who did a good job of limiting hard contact. Was not the case last year. He allowed a 13% barrel rate, and that was the highest mark on the slate among pitchers in their most relevant sample. So a lot of hard contact, not a lot of strikeouts, which has never really been his game. That led to a 5.36 skill interactive ERA for Roark. The reason I'd probably favor the Blue Jays over the Rangers here, if I had to pick just one of those two teams to stack, is that they're a better team. You look at the numbers here, 113 WRC plus for the Jays against righties. The Rangers at just 79%. They're not a great team, so I think I would still go with the Blue Jays here, despite the fact that the Rangers have the preferred matchup. Let's see if the lineups are out for either team yet. I don't think they were the last time I checked. Okay, so the Blue Jays lineup is out. Got Biggio batting second as expected. Vlad is in there. That's good because he got hit in the hand yesterday. Was a little bit concerned we might not get Vlad Guerrero Jr. in there for today, but he is batting fifth. I think that's a good thing for this whole lineup. Definitely good for sure. It does bump Rowdy Tellez down to seventh. A little bit disheartening for sure, but I still think that he is viable just because the salary is so low. Let's pull up the Jays numbers here. These numbers are for their active roster since the start of last year. So these include numbers from both 2020 and 2021 in the small sample thus far. And George Springer's on there. He shouldn't be because he's not actually active, but whatever. We'll go with it anyway. Guerrero hopefully getting a better launch angle this year. Let's check out the salary for him. Did have a dinger earlier, so that's definitely encouraging. Blue Jays right there. Okay. And we see that Vlad is $3,000. That is not bad at all. I will definitely take that. I think that's a very good salary for him. Marcus Semien off to a good start, $3,100 for him. Teoscar Hernandez has a lot of power, so I think it's a fair salary there. If you're looking for salary savers in the Blue Jays here, you got Biggio, $2,700. Mentioned him before. I think his like power numbers are just okay. 34% hard hit rate, a lot of fly balls, which you like for sure. But the barrel percentage on Biggio, if I recall correctly, was a little bit lower last year than you would necessarily want. The problem is it doesn't matter because his salary is so low and he's in a good park for hitting. So I still think that Biggio makes a lot of sense. I can pick all the nits that I want to with his 5% barrel rate, but at the end of the day, I do still think that he's a good play because he's a low salary, batting high in the order in a good matchup that we like. Tellez, good power hitter, I think, with a 268 ISO against righties last year. So I would say between those guys, you should have plenty of leverage to get back in to the other high salary pitchers we like for tonight. So yeah, Brad, I very much like both the Blue Jays and the Rangers. Prefer the Blue Jays between the two, but I do think both are very good options. Kevin, thoughts on Patrick Cantlay? Thinking about starting my lineup with him. You just missed Brandon, I'm sorry, but I can talk some golf too. Cantlay, I think, not one of the guys I'm targeting in that upper range. I'm a huge Cantlay guy. I've used Patrick Cantlay potentially more than anyone else over the past 3 or so years, but I think there are just better options I like more in that salary tier, specifically Finau. I think that with them being there, I'm okay being off of Cantlay. I think the issue with Cantlay that I have is I'd rather spend up to get to guys like Dustin Johnson, like Justin Thomas, etc., but I'd rather go down to Finau than go to Cantlay. So I'm not actually super into Cantlay, Kevin, despite the fact I tend to be into Cantlay always. I just think for this specific week, not going to wind up being there for me personally. Let's go back to the pitchers. After talking a little bit about the stacks, I had Giolito number 1. Glasnow is my number 2 for tonight, facing off with the Red Sox. And it's not a great matchup. I know the Red Sox have had a rough start to the year, but it's also not a bad one, obviously. A 100 WRC plus, that is exactly league average against righties based on their current active roster since the start of last year. 23% strikeout rate, also roughly average. 8% walk rate, that's a little bit below average. So it's a good matchup. It's also a cool park today, 52-degree temperatures out at Fenway Park. That bodes well for Glasnow. We want our pitchers in cool temperatures. We want our hitters in hot temperatures. Glasnow, the numbers I have here are over a larger sample. It's over, I believe it's 7 starts, past 8 starts for Glasnow. The sample I have here is what he's been doing since he lowered his four-seam fastball. He was leaning more on his off-speed stuff. Now, in most of the sample, the off-speed stuff was his curveball. But last time out, we saw him debut a slider. And it wasn't like he just introduced a new pitch. Like it wasn't as if he brought this pitch out for 10% of the time. He leaned fully into that slider in his first start of the year. It was 33% usage. Actually, I think it was 34 based on the numbers at Baseball Savant. He looked great. 15.6% swinging strike rate for Glasnow in that game. Didn't allow any barrels. Didn't go super deep. And I think if you're going to pick nits with Glasnow and push him below Giolito, which I am doing, I would say it revolves around pitch count. You can find that by going to game log, clicking on more BB. It's 77 pitches for Glasnow last week. Now, the reason I'll still put him above Yu Darvish, despite the fact that Darvish went 93 pitches last time, is that if you go back to last year, we see a similar pitch count for Glasnow in his first start last year. 72 there. He went up to 88 in his second start. I'm expecting about 90 pitches for Glasnow tonight. If you give me 90 pitches of Glasnow being how effective he has been since he decided to use his off-speed stuff more often, I'm pretty good with that. So I'm going to put Glasnow number 2. That is not anything negative about Yu Darvish. As you can see here, my numbers love him. 3.11 skill interactive ERA. That's better than Giolito in each guy's most relevant sample. 32% strikeout rate. 5% walk rate. Those are phenomenal numbers. The issue that I run into with Yu Darvish is that he's facing the Giants. And the Giants run their organization in a very intelligent way where they will optimize their batting order based on the handedness of the opposing starter. So with a righty out there today with Yu Darvish, they're probably going to have a lot of lefties. And that's tough for sure. So as a result of that, just a 21% strikeout rate for them against righties, a 120 WRC plus since the start of last year. Those are much tougher numbers than what Giolito and Glasnow will face. So although I'm a big Yu Darvish guy, we wind up again in a situation where I'm not on him just like we were last week. So I love Yu Darvish long-term. Definitely want to be there. But I think that tonight not going to be the night for me to be in on Yu Darvish. If you have additional questions about tonight's slate, feel free to get those in no matter where you're watching. If you're watching over on the FanDuel YouTube page, you can get the questions in about MLB DFS over there. Taking questions from Facebook, Twitch, and also Twitter. So no matter where you're watching, get those questions in. We can talk pitchers. We can talk stacks. We can talk process for MLB DFS. We can talk whatever you may want, one-offs, value plays, etc. Get those questions in. Make sure you're subscribed. Dr. Disrespect here at noon tomorrow. I'll be back on at 4 p.m. tomorrow to talk MLB DFS, among other things, I assume, because it is a weird slate distribution for tomorrow. So we talked about the top 3 pitchers and why I'm ranking those specific guys where I have them. Let's talk about a lower salary pitcher, because all 3 of those guys have salaries at $9,700 or higher. They're the 3 highest salary pitchers in the slate. Kind of boring to just say, I think they're good. Obviously, they're good if their salaries are that high. But let's look for a value play. And I think that value play for me is going to be, as nerve-wracking as it can be, Freddie Peralta. Freddie Peralta, a tough guy to get a real sample on because he hasn't been a starter in quite some time. Last year, made 1 start for the Brewers. His 1 appearance so far this year was in relief. And it was a very, very Freddie Peralta-like start where he went 2 innings. He got 6 strikeouts. So all of his outs via strikeout. But he did it in 53 pitches. So not efficient with his pitches. That's definitely scary for tonight. But his salary is all the way down at $6,400. So you can afford to have a little bit of wiggle room there, and it does allow you to load up on Coors Field, load up on the Diamondbacks and the Rockies. That's a good thing for sure. Another question about Dr. Disrespect. He's here at noon Eastern tomorrow, so make sure you subscribe. Tune back in for that tomorrow when he'll be streaming. But you're in the right channel, so you're in the right spot. Wise Guy 1979. You're in the right spot. Just here tomorrow at noon Eastern. Talking about Peralta, though, 53 pitches in relief. He went 85 pitches back in the spring, so I'd expect him to be relatively stretched out, and he can get strikeouts. His velocity in that first start was really good. He used a changeup a bit more often. The changeup 9.4% of the time in that outing. He didn't throw it at all last year, and he was at much lower usage in 2018 and 2019. So if we get Freddie Peralta to be a three-pitch pitcher, that's a little bit enticing. Especially because the velocity on the fastball was really good. He upped the usage on the slider too. That's enticing for me with Freddie Peralta. I don't know if he'll be good. He could be totally terrible, but at the beginning of the year is the exact time where you should be okay taking chances on guys with low salaries who have a path to upside, and Peralta is one of those guys. He's also facing a Cubs team that will strike out. Peralta, 27% strikeout rate. I believe this was his most recent time as a starter. 26% strikeout rate for the Cubs against righties and 90 WRC plus. I think they're better than that, so I'd take the over on that number if I were betting the Cubs WRC plus for this year, but not a bad matchup by any means. So I think my strategy for tonight is to revolve mostly around the higher salary pitchers, Glasnow, Giolito, Darvish. But if I do decide to deviate, I decide that I want to load up on Coors Field and stuff like that, the guy I would bump down to is Freddie Peralta. It makes me very nervous, so I don't want to do that all that often. But I do think that there is enough there where you can justify using him at times because he does have a path upside. You got to get points out of your pitcher tonight to hang, given the aces we have available. So if I'm going to spend down, probably will be doing so on Peralta. Question from Brad over on Facebook. Any sleeper hitters for tonight? So by going with sleepers, we're not going to get to Coors Field because you can't really have any sleepers at Coors Field. I talked before about this Blue Jays lineup. I think that Rowdy Tellez is going to be a guy who will fly under the radar. He's batting seventh. That bodes well because people tend to use batters hitting high in the order. He's not the number one player at his position, even on this specific team, because we go to Blue Jays, we go to catcher/first base. You got Vlad Guerrero Jr. Who doesn't want to use Vlad? I want to use Vlad personally. So he's not the number one guy at his position on this specific team. So people probably aren't going to get to Les all that often. But as we showed before, he's got some good power against righties, 37% hard hit rate, a 41% fly ball rate, not a lot of strikeouts. He's actually kind of a good hitter. So I'm confused about why he's batting seventh. It's annoying given that I think that he does have some talent. Hasn't looked totally lost at the dish so far this year. The way to judge that is looking at the strikeout rate. Not too bad by any means. So I actually think Tellez is pretty decent. He's going to be undervalued because he's batting lower in the order. $2,200 is a good salary too. So Brad, if you're looking for a sleeper hitter to use for tonight, I would say that Tellez is probably going to wind up being that guy. So we talked about the Jays, talked about the Rangers. Let's go to Coors Field and talk about the lineups there. I think the Rockies are out. Yes, they are. We got Tapia batting leadoff, Hampson second, Crone fifth, McMahon sixth. The guy I want to talk about here is Sam Hilliard. Sam Hilliard's actually pretty fun. I know we don't talk about him a lot because he's not Trevor Story, he's not Charlie Blackmon or anything like that, but he actually has a couple of paths to upside. He can swipe some bags. That's definitely a good thing. 3 stolen bases for him last year, but not a terrible amount of power. You look back to his numbers in AAA. With the Rockies, you do need to take the caveat of their AAA park is also a very hitter-friendly park, so you're not comparing apples to apples if you compare him to other minor leaguers. But in AAA, 296 ISO for him. High strikeout rate, but a lot of dingers, a lot of stolen bases. 2 paths to upside. I'm going to take that every time for a guy, especially when you give it to me at Coors Field, because the upside of Coors Field is that it's a big outfield. That means that you're going to have a high batting average on balls in play. So maybe he won't get a home run because the temperatures for tonight at Coors Field are super low, 49 degrees, the first pitch temperature for the Rockies and the Diamondbacks. That does downgrade Coors Field quite a bit. However, we don't need the home runs for a guy like Sam Hilliard to be very much in play because he can get the stolen bases as well. So I would say that Hilliard is going to wind up being a decently big focal point for me for tonight because he has those dual sources of upside. He is what is effectively the minimum salary for Coors Field. I know we got like Elias Diaz at a lower salary, but Hilliard, $3,000, batting 7th at Coors Field, facing a pitcher in Luke Weaver who didn't get a lot of strikeouts last year. I think that all adds up really well. So I think that this is a good situation to go with Sam Hilliard in that 7 hole and feel pretty good about that. Red Devils. This man seriously knows stuff about a lot of sports. Football fan, we call soccer. I love golf too. I don't know actually a lot of soccer, unfortunately. I'm going to be pretty rough in that arena, but golf is good. Brandon definitely has you covered with golf. We have our Heat Check Fantasy podcast, the DFS podcast, talking about golf on FanDuel. That's every Tuesday. That's at 10 a.m. Eastern right here on the same YouTube page. Back then, Brandon has his Q&As every Tuesday, 3:30 p.m. Eastern. I'm back here 4 p.m. with MLB DFS. So from a non-American football perspective, sorely lacking, and I am upset about that. Sorry. Definitely don't want to let you down there by any means. No lineup out for the Diamondbacks as of yet, but if you want to look back at past lineups, you can do so in Baseball Press. Just click on the team name. Look back here at some past lineups. They're facing a righty for today. Not as into the Diamondbacks today and the Rockies, mostly because I feel good about Aaron Marquez as a pitcher. Good pitcher, not when he's facing the Dodgers, obviously, but and the Diamondbacks also is not a good team, nor are the Rockies. And it's not a great park. So it's not like full Coors Field is what we usually have, but I do still think there is value in going at guys here. Talked about Hilliard before. As far as the Diamondbacks go, Josh Rojas probably going to wind up batting leadoff. That's a good thing for him. He's got some talent. Ketel Marte we can get behind. Pavin Smith, a former really high draft pick for the Diamondbacks. Interesting to see him batting at a good spot in the order too. Let's pull up some numbers here on the Diamondbacks and see what we can find against Marquez. Again, not prioritizing them because they're not that great. And Marquez, a pretty good pitcher overall. We can check out the numbers here and see what we have. I like what we see from Rojas as we pull up the numbers here. Rojas, small sample of 55 plate appearances and not great results, but decent peripherals. And if we dig back deeper with Rojas and look at his numbers in the minors, I'm pretty sure what we saw there was solid for him. As we wait for the page to load, scroll down here. Yeah, in the minors, good numbers in AAA back in 2019. Just a 15% strikeout rate, 276 isolated slugging percentage. That's really good. So I would say if we get Rojas at a good spot in the order for tonight for this Diamondbacks team, I think he measures up pretty well from a daily fantasy perspective. Rojas's salary for tonight is $3,000, and he's eligible at shortstop and second base. So I would say Rojas, despite the fact that I'm not super into the Diamondbacks overall, probably someone I'm going to wind up using just because I think he's underpriced, undersalaried, I should say, for FanDuel. So Rojas, good option. Pavin Smith, $3,000. Not a guy we have a lot of data on because, again, he was drafted just a couple of years ago. We can pull up his data here and check out the minor league numbers. Not going to have a ton because last year was wiped out, but we do have some stuff we can look at for Smith and see what he did in the minors. I don't think he was a big power guy back in the day. Yeah, 175 ISO in AA back in 2019, but not a lot of strikeouts, so put the ball in play. Last year in the majors, 6.5% barrel percentage, over 44 plate appearances, probably not a big enough sample for that to stabilize, but still, doing okay. 6.5% barrel rate, 135 ISO, not a lot of strikeouts. So I think the Diamondbacks actually do have some good value plays. I'm still not, champing at the bit to necessarily lock them in at all times, but I do think that between Rojas and Smith, you've got good options, should be good spots in the order, lowish salaries for exposure to Coors Field. That all adds up pretty well. So to me, from a stacking perspective for tonight, I like the Rockies offense a good amount. I like both the Rangers and the Blue Jays out in Texas. And then I do like the Diamondbacks. They'd probably be my number 4 stack for tonight. If you want a couple others, just before we finish up here, I think the Mets are pretty solid against Chase Anderson. Rough year for him last year, specifically letting up a lot of hard contact. I can get behind that as well. So hopefully some good options there from a stacking perspective. That is all the time that we have here today on the MLB DFS Q&A. But if you were here for Dr. Disrespect, again, come back tomorrow, noon Eastern. He'll be live here on this FanDuel YouTube page. So just make sure you're subscribed, hit that subscribe button, come back noon Eastern tomorrow. Check out his stream. I'll be back with you 4 p.m. Eastern tomorrow as well, talking MLB DFS, potentially among other things. Maybe we'll talk some NFL draft betting, because why not with the weird slate tomorrow. But just overall, make sure you are subscribed on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter channels to get these questions in for the Q&A each and every day. If you have questions for me, I am on Twitter at JimSannes, JimSannes. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. Thank you to Brandon Gdula for running the master side of things. Earlier here today, we'll be doing this every Tuesday with both golf and MLB right here on this channel to get you set for all your DFS lineups. Talk to you once again soon. This has been the FanDuel Fantasy Q&A.